And so I've been talking a lot about how I had this intuition, and this isn't just an intuition. I mean, this is something that has been communicated to us by mystics and philosophers and suggested by some physicists that there's some relationship between light and consciousness. And so, one of the big questions that eventually led me to is if it is true that our consciousness is able to compel matter to move, to do anything, by what mechanism is it able to do so? And so the answer I came up with was electromagnetic energy. And so I still had a lot of, what's up, man? A lot of questions in regards to the actual mechanisms behind all of this. So today I started really looking into it, and I discovered that it is actually one of the front runner theories that consciousness, that the seat of consciousness is electromagnetic energy. And then on top of that, I discovered that the brain is actually full of nanoparticles of magnetite, which is the most magnetic mineral known, and that the densest concentration of magnetite in the brain are in regions where the brain has a connection to physical movement. So this idea of electromagnetism compelling consciousness using somehow electromagnetism to compel movement and matter is at least very strongly anecdotally supported by evidence. And so it gets way deeper, way crazier. The last live stream, I was talking about how the infinity symbol is like two zeros, right? And they're kind of swirling back and forth. And how, on one side, what we have is basically 1 0 with a negative polarity somehow, and another nothingness with a positive polarity. And this is it's not, what's up, man? It's not even absurd by the standards of mathematics, because mathematics has to posit these, like 0 is an irrational number, but then we have zeros of different orders of magnitude in order to deal with certain equations and that have irrational numbers. So this idea of zeros with different qualities, or zeros that are qualitatively different in function, is actually something that exists in mathematics. And so this idea of like twin out-of-phase spirals, right, is what I was suggesting that the infinity symbol is. And so we basically have these two 0-point sources that are out of phase, and one is negative and one is positive, and they're spiraling in opposite directions. Like you just follow the track, right? And then there's a point in the middle where they cross. The vector of convergence, or the point of confluence. And because these zeros or spirals are absolute positive negative energy and absolute negative and absolute positive, it's at the point of convergence or confluence where the two forces mediate each other enough to create the space for creation to arise. And this point of convergence is also the monad. It is the consciousness that is compelling all of this stuff to order and symmetry. And so we have, this brings us to the mysterious and much misunderstood, there's a lot of misinformation, the pineal gland, the third eye. And let's just do some myth busting right out the gate. First of all, there's no evidence that DMT is produced in the pineal gland. Sorry to put that one to rest, but it's just not true. There is DMT in the entire brain, and in the lungs and in other tissues, but there's no evidence that is specifically generated by the pineal gland, none at all. And even if it was, if you were to gather up all of the DMT in the entire body and smoke it, there wouldn't be enough to have a psychoactive effect. So this idea that DMT somehow causes out-of-body experiences when you die because of the pineal gland dumping and all of this is probably nonsense. And then even worse, and this is the greatest, I love busting this myth because this is pop culture at its absolute worst, the disinformation. Do not try to decalcify your pineal gland. The pineal gland is two piezoelectric crystals that are made of calcium carbonate. So if you were to successfully decalcify your pineal gland, it would literally dissolve. You wouldn't have one anymore. It's not real. This like pop culture idea that you're calcifying your pineal gland with, processed foods and whatever else is just complete nonsense. Uh, but I'm not saying that processed foods do not um, mitigate spiritual experience. They absolutely do. In my experience as an ayahuasca facilitator, uh, I have seen people that eat nothing but processed foods. This last couple, actually, they ate like white bread and like processed meat, all this stuff. I had to give them unbelievable quantities of mushrooms, ayahuasca, like just keep piling it in there, and it had nothing had any effect until just they had consumed an insane quantity. And even then, it was, eventually it was like, moderately strong, but it was their first experience. And all I could do with every compound at my disposal to catalyze an experience was just pump them full of everything. And I believe that it's because of the processed food. The diet that people talk about, don't eat meat, don't have sex, all of these things, most of it, the shamans sit around and laugh at the fire at night and talk about how the tourist diet and the tourist medicine, it's not really a real thing. There are some reasons for the precautions, but the dieta, like I know shamans, I personally, you can eat meat, you can have sex, you can do all these things. Don't have sex during ceremony, but if you eat processed foods, that will get in the way. Okay, so back to the pineal gland though. Remember this infinity symbol and this idea of out of phase spirals. Um, it turns out that the pineal gland works exactly the same way. And I talk a lot about how you can sort of detect the proximity to divinity of a model, of art, of lyrics, of um, anything by how closely it reflects the truths that it represents. And the zero is probably the best example of this. Everything contains this contradiction, right? And that this zero, this point of nothingness, is actually the it's the all, right? And it's sustaining the all, even though it is the negation of the all. Um, and so this out of phase. Oh man! And I had to correct a theory that I've had for years and years and years. You guys, this is why you can't fall in love with your ideas. You have to be humble and you have to be prepared to revise what you think. Because I have always said that the universe is it's what gives rise to the universe is the interplay of antinomies and perfect balance. And I realized that I don't think it is quite perfect, almost. But just as these two piezoelectric calcium crystals in your third eye are slightly out of phase, they're a little bit asymmetrical. Otherwise, there would be no function. There would be nothing happening. It has to be a little tiny bit out of balance in order for there to be a piezoelectric effect. Because the piezoelectric effect is, let's look at the dictionary definition. The principle of operation of a piezoelectric sensor is that a physical dimension is transformed into a force and acts on two opposing faces of the sensing element. And so, basically, there has to be a force of opposition. And so what I am suggesting now is that yes, the universe is the interplay of nearly perfectly balanced forces, but the positive is overriding the negative to such an extent that something has happened, right? If it was perfect symmetry, they would totally, completely cancel each other out. And so that is how we have some kind of unidirectional flow. Because even though the two spirals on the infinity symbol are out of phase, they are still fundamentally moving in the same direction. It's just that relative to each other, right, they're out of phase with each other. Okay, so let me pull this together, man. This has been Isn't that funny though about the don't calcify your pineal gland? It's made of calcium. Like, don't worry about it. If you can get some extra calcium in there, build that thing up. Um, yeah. Okay. So 2 0-point sources spiraling, one side of the veil, the other side of the veil. This is also why in mysticism we talk about how on the other side of the veil everything is reversed. It's because of that spiral motion across this track, right, of infinity. I hope that makes sense. So one is totally negative, one is totally positive, spiraling in opposite directions. They are positive and negative, but absolute positive and negative, and the point of confluence or vector of convergence where the two influences intermediate creates the balance that gives rise to creation. So that was like the big, and then we have basically a microcosm of that right in the middle of our forehead. And I'll tell you guys kind of the story of how I really started to think about the pineal gland, because, you know, I've always been interested in the possibility that we have sixth sense. Actually, this all led to the mechanism behind telepathy. I'm absolutely positive at this point, and it's really obvious, man. I'm just like, I'm that far ahead of these researchers because I've tied it all together. Like, they have got all the little pieces, but I don't think anyone has really tied it all together yet. There is this resonance theory that pretty much is there, but I think I might have beat them, and I did it with intuition and ayahuasca and San Pedro. And that's not entirely true. I've studied a lot of science and whatnot, but at any rate, okay, so ayahuasca, DMT, and this connection to the pineal gland. I'm certainly not suggesting when I say that it's a myth that DMT is generated in the pineal gland. I don't mean that it has no relationship to DMT, because one night I had drank ayahuasca and I was kind of coming down. I was laying on this porch in the jungle, and I had my eyes closed, but I noticed I could see everything. A mosquito landed on my forehead. I could see the railing on the porch. I was waving my hands in front of my eyes, trying to figure out, man, could my brain really, what's up, man? Could my brain really generate this stuff this accurately and this quickly? And I thought, well, yeah, probably. So I was kind of stuck. I was like watching it for a while and doing all these tests to try to figure out, like, and also there was this orange tint, as if I was looking through blood and bone, you know? It wasn't like clear. It was as if there was something veiling it and kind of making it orangish red. And so remember the pineal gland's connection to the sixth sense, right? That's important in this story. So the next morning I wake up, I go downstairs. The shaman doesn't say to me, here's some breakfast, or how did you sleep, or how was the medicine? He just looks at me and he says, sometimes you can see through your forehead when you take the medicine. And so there's a lot to unpack there with the universal mind and how it can speak through individuals to each other and all of that sort of stuff. But for the point of this story, what we're really interested in is the fact that I thought, okay, I need to look into this. So I went home and I Googled pineal gland rods and cones. So it turns out that the pineal gland does actually have rods and cones, photoreceptor cells, the whole 9 yards, and it's wired to the visual cortex, which means that it's a functioning eye. We know that it is receptive to light, that it can respond to light, and not only is it does it respond to light, but all electromagnetic signals. And an investigation to determine if the pineal gland would respond to EMFs by a transducer mechanism, studies were conducted to ascertain if pineal tissues were piezoelectric. Second harmonic generation measurements showed that pineal tissues contained non-centrosymmetric crystals, thus proving the presence of piezoelectricity. And basically the answer is yes. It responds to EMFs. So we have the pineal gland responding to EMFs. We have magnetite throughout the brain. I wrote down the quantities. It's crazy how much of it there is. It's a presence of a minimum of 5 million single domain crystals per gram for most tissues in the brain. So by the way, you guys do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe. Ritual Magic course on the Patreon. If you're digging this, then you definitely, that's where how you can extend all of this and make applications out of it. And we're trying, tomorrow's the first. So if you've been on the fence about signing up for Patreon, do it right now, tonight, please. We're trying to raise money to go and spend time in the Warani village. And as it stands, we have not raised enough money. So we really do need your support. There are PayPal and Zelle addresses in the description, as well as a Binance Smart Chain wallet address you can send to. So there is a ton of magnetite in the brain, and it's concentrated in areas that move matter, which is exactly what I was theorizing. That that consciousness, the mechanism by which it acts upon matter is this electromagnetic energy. So it's crazy, man. It was really crazy to discover that all this stuff that I was thinking is actually totally substantiated by science. But there's more. There's definitely more. Okay, so then what is the pineal gland doing? Because we already have two eyes that are dealing with incoming light signals, right? And decoding them and sending information to our brain and doing the job that the visual cortex needs eyes to do. So what is the function of the third eye? Well, we know that it receives light, right? And then we also know that if we take DMT, sometimes it actually activates and you can look through your forehead, right? So what I am thinking is that it processes parts of the spectrum of light that we normally do not process, right? So it's picking up different signals, and so those signals are the non-ordinary aspects of consciousness that we don't use on a day-to-day basis. We generally have these fleeting experiences of precognition, of telepathy, intuiting things, but they're usually come and go for most people, or even just once or twice in a lifetime. So I think the DMT brings down the filters, the pineal gland is activated, and it starts picking up information from different frequencies than it normally would. Okay, so another bit of this, speaking of telepathy, that I was able to uncover is that one of these studies determined that synapses were responding to EMFs that were not connected. That's a big deal. And in fact, and it's a very new study. It was just done in 2019, so it's a couple of years old now. But this was a huge slap in the face to the researchers that now we have a huge problem, because we have an indication that telepathy could have a basis in deterministic explanation, so we had synapses communicating that were not connected by means of EMF. So that's more in support of this theory that consciousness acts upon everything by way of electromagnetic. By the way, this is also why ritual magic tools are usually made of magnetic metals. So what else do we have? We've talked about the magnetite crystals. Okay, so the transducer thing. So this is where the piezoelectric properties are actually used, and why there's a necessity for the pineal gland to exist. And so a transducer is a device that converts a small amount of energy from one kind into another. So light into sound, or sound into light, mechanical pressure into electrical signals. So the pineal gland itself is a piezoelectric transducer. And so what that means is that it is there to convert signals from various radio waves or electromagnetic frequencies into information. And this is how it facilitates telepathy and precognition, and why it's associated with the sixth sense. And so I think that covers it all. I mean, I did that in 20 minutes or something, but wow, man, it's quite a day, because it really gave me a sense of validation, that I have. Well, I told the ayahuasca story. So the next thing that happened. So I drank the ayahuasca and I could see through the third eye, and then later on, not much later on, a little bit later on, I had this San Pedro vision where I had become a single photon in a sea of photons, and I could zoom in on the photons and like look at them and move them and turn them around. And when I did that, I could see that they were actually tesseracts that would change form, but it's not that they were changing form. A tesseract is a shape that also exists in the dimension of time, and so you can never perceive the whole thing at once. It's always the whole thing is there, but you can't see the whole thing all at once. And so, um, and so that's what each individual unit of consciousness is. And I mean, man, these things went forever. I could see for a billion miles, and there were trillions and trillions and trillions of them. And it's actually, I later discovered, a pretty common vision to have on San Pedro. And a lot of, the San Pedro shamans know a lot about light. And when I actually started telling the story to one of the San Pedro shamans, I didn't have to say much before he was able to just kind of take over and say everything that I was planning to say to him. And so, no, it's not sad, Fernando. I think that it's exactly what we need, really. I mean, the problem is when our deterministic, materialistic programming is so difficult to override that it becomes an impediment, which was a problem even for me. I'm a pretty out-of-the-box person. But I think it's actually really good that we are able to balance when science and mysticism dovetail, when someone is able to intuit things that are confirmed by science. That's a really powerful convergence of tradition and discipline, different disciplines. And so, I'm really grateful for it. I understand what you're saying. I think you meant, the way that yeah, I mean, well, you have to, because, these ideas that I had may have stood up to the test of scientific validation, but a lot of mysticism and people's ideas actually are just crazy nonsense. And so we kind of have this yardstick to measure them against, and it doesn't just validate the ideas, but also the process. And my general defining characteristic of my methodology is that the non-physical, the energetic, the metaphysical models are going to reflect in natural systems because they have as their basis the same energy and they're subject to the same laws. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it's just another tool that we have to confirm that these things are true. I mean, it wouldn't have done me a lot of good to have these ideas about light and electromagnetism and consciousness if I didn't have science there to show me that people looking through a completely different lens have seen the same thing. I mean, that's like consensus reality. Um, that's kind of how we know that things are objectively real, is that no matter who is looking, if there's a tiger right there, everyone that looks at it sees a tiger. There's nothing subjective about it. You know what I mean? A tiger's a fucking tiger. And so when this kind of correspondence happens, where I've intuited all these things, and really, of course, the deeper and more powerful message is that it shows us, at least anecdotally, that we do have the power or the ability, the capacity to access information through non-ordinary means that is actually accurate and relevant and real in the objective sense. Because, I've read some layman's books on physics, and maybe I'm a smart guy, but I'm definitely uneducated. And I had not encountered any of this information about any of these studies or really thought too much about it. It was, pretty much entirely intuitive that I came to these conclusions that have all turned out to be correct. So, and I'm not trying to be self-celebratory there because it's got nothing to do with me. It's just all about the process and the validation of the process and the reality that we can access this information, which I think is important. And there's so much implied by those type of experiences. Um, and I think that, it also kind of validates other parts of my process where, I'm much more skeptical than a lot of people that become spiritual. I put things through an analytical ringer to a degree that I think a lot of people uh, think is maybe even unhealthy. And I've always thought that that was a total cop out, that we should use the same tools and hold the same standards to our spiritual life that we would in our physical life. Uh, there's really no difference um, fundamentally. Yeah, and well, and we have to be careful because there's a real tendency for people to abuse scientific interpretations, and one of the biggest ones is the slit experiment, where people love to say that there was this experiment with photoelectromagnetic plates and particles, photons of light are shot through slits, and they recorded the pattern, and the outcome depended on the expectations of the observer, which is not true. It's just not true. That's not what happened. That's not an interpretation of the experiment that any scientist anywhere ever made. It is purely New Age, layman's pop psychology interpretation of uh, something that has nothing to do with that. Um, so we have to be careful about doing that because I actually used that experiment and that misinterpretation of the results to support what turned out to be an erroneous view for a long time. And it's not that it's wrong, and I don't think that it is wrong, but it's not suggested by the evidence in the way that people suggest. And I think that, you know, part of our purpose as people that have a spiritual dimension to our existence is to catalyze change in people that don't have that. And when we make gross interpretations of science and misapply, and intelligent people see that, it dissuades them from listening to us. So that's why it's such a frustration for me that the lunatic fringe is so deeply associated with spirituality, and that so many people, when they open themselves up to something beyond the material, they become so open-minded that wind whistles through their ears, and then they're not really of any utility to themselves or anyone else. And so, I think that it's also sort of disrespectful to the concept of a mystic or a shaman or any kind of philosopher, because people just don't think that it takes really any discipline or development or scrutiny or tedious work to really become good at it. It's just like anybody can just meditate for 10 minutes. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people eat mushrooms like 3 times and decide they know what all their incarnations are and they're equal to the shaman almost instantly. And it's just this crazy ego based nonsense. It has taken me a lifetime of very careful, methodical, tedious work to come up with the concepts that I have. To it's just put me through the ringer. So I think that people really just we don't have that respect in our culture for the office of the seer and the mystic and the well, thanks, Ken. And I'm just saying that anyone that's good at anything has. Yeah, well, they're waves and particles, and that's the thing. This is just one of those mysteries that we just don't have a good answer for. One of the things that we will find something like an answer to is you have to think about scale and time. No, it's not disproved by Tesla. It might be contended. He contended against it, but I don't think it is scientific hubris, because no one has, including Tesla, no one has been able to explain why patterns record as both waves and particles. Um, so whatever energy is uh, well, it's still just an interpretation of observation. It's not. I mean, I've read Tesla and Ken Wheeler and stuff, and I just don't agree that it's proof. Yeah, I don't buy it. I'm gonna have to respectfully decline to agree with you on that one. But what I was saying is that well, it doesn't matter who it is. I mean, Einstein was wrong about things. I mean, no one no one is always right. Um, okay, but we're talking about the behavior, the observations of waves and particles, and this is probably the last thing that I'm going to bring up in this live stream. This is going to be like our closing topic, uh, and it's something that I am convinced um, could lead to the ultimate theory of everything. I think this is the missing link. And I have actually spoken to at least one person with a PhD in physics that has suggested that this is probably correct. Um, and so, again, talking about particles, and I mean, basically, Fernando, the other problem with that is that if what you were saying was true, hadron colliders wouldn't work, particle physics would not be able to produce consistent results, and that's not what we find. We can create particles, we can fire particles at each other, and well, we can't create them, but we can derive them, basically, I guess. So there is functionality there. We can do experiments, and we can observe the effects of whatever it is that Tesla's saying isn't there. It does stuff that is repeatable and predictable. So I mean, it's kind of a hard thing to object against. Also, Tesla died like what 80 years ago or something, 90 years ago. I mean, I don't really know how long ago, a long time. And so he didn't have the information available to him to come to those conclusions that we do now. Um, so no, waves do not behave like particles. That's why we know they're two different things. Um, okay, but what I was saying about the scale of time, right? So if you shrink down to where you are the same size relative to the nucleus of an atom that you are to the Earth right now, it would appear, or it would be the same distance from where you were standing that there is to the moon, to the nearest proton, right? Like it's the same, as above, so below, Ketter's and Malkut, but after another fashion, that whole thing, right? So I think that if you were to shrink down to that scale in size, electrons would not blink in and out of existence rapidly. They would seem to last just as long as stars. And so it occurred to me that when we talk about entrainment, which is pulses, this is relating back to the idea of people abusing scientific um, interpretations of scientific evidence. Um, Entrainment it's not a theory, it's a thing that happens. If you put two human beings together, their heartbeats will sync. Anything that pulses, put it close together, it'll eventually sync up. Clocks will do it, electrical lines will do it, microwaves will do it. Um, um, so entrainment, right? And I saw somebody post on Facebook the other day that, and it's funny because this misunderstanding of this is actually what gave rise to this epiphany for me, which is ironic. But they were saying that because of entrainment, if you say something or have a feeling on this side of the planet, that on the other side of the planet, it would affect someone. And that's not what they were actually calling it. What's the other thing that's kind of like entanglement? That's not what entanglement is. Entanglement is that any particle, no matter the distance, even if it's across the entire known universe, if it has ever been entangled with another particle, it will respond instantly, right? Not almost instantly, but instantly. And this is a huge problem for Einsteinian relativity because if information is being exchanged, then it's faster than the speed of light, which means that everything must be in the same place somehow and not actually separate. So, and this is another one of those examples of science and mysticism really dovetailing, but what it gave rise to is that entrainment and waves and and uh, um, entanglement are not actually distinctly separate phenomena. They're the same phenomena, but on totally different scales. So, entrainment is entanglement um, in macro, right? So, we will find, as I've been saying all this time, some of you guys I realize today have been following this channel since the beginning. A lot of people have lost, and I always wonder why, what happened to them. You know, like there was, the guy Wombat, Persian Wombat. I haven't heard from him in a while, and like transgendered Mohammed or something like that. All kinds of crazy names. Few people have disappeared. But actually, today I felt better than I have in years, Fernando, since you asked. I'm hesitant to get excited because I feel better and then I feel worse again, and it's horrible because I'll feel better and I'm like, oh, it's over, and then it's not over. I didn't get my test results from the doctor the other day because the last bus runs at 5 o'clock and we got there at 7, so we didn't want to pay for a taxi, so I have to go back get the test results. Leaky gut is probably part of the problem, yeah. And I think I had probably some parasites because toxoplasmosis or some bacteria, because toxoplasmosis causes risky behavior and your brain is just totally fucked up. And I really can, a lot of my behavior over the last 2 years is not consistent with I wouldn't have done a lot of it, it's almost like a puppet. And what really drove it home the other day, speaking of like synchronicities and symmetry and all that kind of thing, well, it's because of a parasite. It's a reaction to something some toxin that they produce, I think. But, so I was thinking about this, and there was a snake out in the yard that was like doing all this weird crap. Like it almost looked like a mating dance, only it was obviously screwed up. And I realized that it had to be a parasite that was causing this weird behavior. And then on the way to go to the hospital to get the parasite tests, we found a caterpillar that had been torn, that was getting devoured by a parasitical fungus and had all these maggots all over it as well. So it was like full of parasites. Well, thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, also I think it's no coincidence that I was feeling better today and I was able to pull together. I mean, what I described earlier in this live stream is almost like my magnum opus. Like, it's like a disembodied voice at one point told me that my success would be my proof, and I feel like you guys have watched me trying to make sense out of these visions and these intuitions. And then today I was able to show you guys the research and the actual, it's all true. And man, the thing about magnetite all through the brain, especially in the areas that govern motor sensory stuff, that's wild, man, because it really, really, really strongly suggests that this idea that electromagnetism is what, but of course it is, I feel like this is really, really obvious, and this is one of the areas where I think, or an example of where science can actually get in the way, because these guys are so close to understanding what I've described in this live stream, but it's like they're so hung up on the process of science and the protocol of experiment that it sort of precludes making certain connections. And it is important for the discipline, but I think throughout the history of science, there have been plenty of places where it's actually become counterproductive. and the scientific method has been over-applied. So thank you guys so much for watching. We're about to launch some t-shirts, the Syncretic Spiritual Systems, Spirit, Science, and Sacrament t-shirts, the Illuminated State Triclops Varsity. I know you guys are going to want one of those. So we have to get on designing the t-shirts because we have to fund this Warani thing, and we also have to pay for my health, and also we have to move sooner than we thought. So please do support us on Patreon or the Zelle or something. We really need to support it. We really want to go and do this thing with the Warani. We're definitely going to go for at least a day, so by 10 days from now or so, I should at least have video of the Warani village and the Warani people, and I will be able to at least interview a shaman and talk to some of them. Incredibly, they are like so legitimately still forest-dwelling people that some of them don't speak Spanish, at least not fluently. That was really a mind blower to see the other day. One of the older Warani women that we were speaking with in town, my partner was saying something to the one that seems to be sort of like the alpha female, and this older lady was like, what is she saying? Because she didn't understand the Spanish. So really excited to be able to immerse myself in a culture that has been totally unaffected and uninfluenced by this one, or by the modern bullshit narcissist making fool factory. It's a fool factory. A ship of fools on a cruel sea. Okay guys, so thank you so much for watching and support us more because we need it. We have to go into the jungle and get this done. So thanks guys, and we'll see you again soon.